As Latinas living in non-Latin countries, we deal with a lot of day-to-day bias and stereotypes. We all have distinct experiences. For example, if you speak English with a non-native accent or have darker skin, there's a good chance that you've had to deal with more extreme bias. But there are plenty of common themes. We're stereotyped as foreign, which means we often hear comments and questions that imply we don't belong. Like, so where are you really from? People tend to assume we're very family-oriented, which leads them to question our commitment to work. We face several layers of bias around our skills. And because of stereotypes that Latinas are exotic or fiery, we're more likely than white women to hear inappropriate comments on our appearance or demeanor.
I have been subject of microaggressions every time I'm asked to do the job of a guy, and I'm not paid or recognized for it.
For me as a Latina, sometimes it's, I'll be asked questions and there's assumptions, or asking me to take notes, assuming that that's what my role is, or as an assumption that I can't possibly be a director in the room.
These are all examples of microaggressions, comments and actions that reflect racism, sexism, and other biases. Of course, microaggressions aren't the only way sexism and racism show up at work. Latinas face many types of unfair treatment at work, such as being underpaid and discriminated against in hiring. But microaggressions happen a lot, and they take a huge toll. The burden should not be on Latinas to fix these problems. It's on leaders and companies to call out bias and to create a better culture. And our colleagues need to do more to show up as allies too. But right now, microaggressions are an unfortunate reality. So when you experience one, well, what can you do? First of all, know that it's not on you to confront anyone. If calling out a microaggression feels unsafe, uncomfortable, or exhausting, it's okay to simply just step back from the situation and focus on taking care of yourself and connect with people you trust for validation and support. And remind yourself that you are talented and worthy of respect. If you want to say something, research shows that doing so can help you feel more empowered and in control. It can also change other people's behavior. If the person who committed the microaggression doesn't realize they're causing harm or doesn't think they'll face consequences, calling attention to it could get them to act differently in the future. There are 3 main strategies that you can use to speak up. One option is to simply state the facts. Researchers have found that this is one of the best ways to make people aware their behavior was wrong while minimizing the risk of a defensive response.
And one of the person from the front desk, he called me and said, "Hi, Diana, you are from Colombia, and I have another guy here from Colombia who needs to speak in Spanish." And I said, "Look, my name is Dolores, not Diana, and I'm from Argentina, not from Colombia."
People would ask, well, how did you get hired by the firm? Well, I'd have to go back and ask the question, from their perspective, what are the skills that they would expect a consultant to have? And then all I could say was, I've run large multi-million-dollar organizations, right? It's like I've led programs.
Another way to respond is to ask someone to explain their thinking. We know from research that this is a good way to get people to re-examine their assumptions.
I was always hearing how articulate I was. And I just learned after listening to that several times to ask questions. Why was it such a surprise to hear, someone who is educated and well-spoken? And that way the conversation turned from me being defensive or needing to credentialize myself, and it turned it into curiosity and dialogue.
I mean, you might be surprised by the power of the simple question, what makes you say that? You can use this question if a colleague criticizes you for getting emotional, makes assumptions about your family or upbringing, and in lots of other situations. If you sense the person acted without thinking and genuinely wants to treat you with respect, you can also tell them directly how their actions were harmful. It's often easiest to do this by following up privately. Following up later gives you a chance to prepare, and talking in private makes it more likely they'll really listen, rather than shutting down because they feel put on the spot.
Some people don't realize that they've just lobbied a microaggression. And in all fairness to the person, I would have a private conversation with that person and give grace to say, you may not be aware that when you said that certain thing, that this is how it felt for me. And oftentimes what I have found is people say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that.
No matter how you respond, there is a risk you'll get pushback. You can't eliminate this risk entirely, but research shows you can reduce it by speaking confidently and deliberately. This is easier to do if you practice your response in advance. Microaggressions can be really traumatic, and it's totally normal to get emotional when you talk about them. But if you've practiced, you'll still be able to get your key points across. Finally, remember that you shouldn't have to deal with microaggressions on your own. If your manager is supportive, talk to them about what's happening. If you don't feel like your manager will be helpful, think about whether there's someone else you can talk to. Maybe there's a colleague who's been outspoken about equity and inclusion at work, or another leader or manager who you trust. Having an advocate can make a big difference. And you deserve to work with people who will speak up when you're not being treated with respect.